Good afternoon, and thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Jennifer Cooley, and I am the Education and Outreach Manager for the State Historical Museum of Iowa. The Iowa History webinars share the Iowa stories and history of the state through a cultural history lens on the second and fourth Thursdays of each month. You can learn more about this series and all of our programs on our website at iowaculture.gov. Please remember to sign up for each webinar you would like to attend, and don't worry if you can't watch live. All presentations will be recorded. Today, we will explore the history of Juneteenth, which has been a state holiday in Iowa since 2002 and became a federal holiday in 2021. Emancipation events in Iowa took place prior to the Civil War in Muscatine, and over time, communities of various sizes, including Clarinda, Corning, and Sioux City, have hosted events. The gatherings show that Iowans of many backgrounds have come together to celebrate freedom and equality. A few housekeeping points before I introduce our speaker. Everyone came into this webinar on mute with cameras off. Closed captions are available by clicking the closed caption button on your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Iowa Culture page of YouTube in a few days. I have disabled the chat function, but if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. My colleague Matt Beyer is watching that feature and will prepare a list of questions for the speaker at the end of the presentation. But please note, we may not be able to get to all of the questions. Now I'm pleased to introduce our presenter, Leo Landis. Leo has his Bachelor's of Science in History from Iowa State University and a Master's of Arts in Historical Administration from Eastern Illinois University. He has completed all but his dissertation towards a PhD in history from Iowa State. His museum experience includes time at Living History Farms in Urbandale, Conner Prairie and Fishers, Indiana, and 8 years as curator at Henry Ford Museum and Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. He has also worked as curator and director of education at Salisbury House in Des Moines. And now I'm very happy to turn it over to Leo to begin the webinar.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you to everyone joining us today and anybody watching this in the future. This is a talk, as Jennifer mentioned in the introduction, that looks at emancipation celebrations in Iowa and what is really a largely forgotten popular event in our state. What inspired me to do this talk was Dr. Leslie Schwalm at University of Iowa, and this will be in the resources that we send out connected to the webinar. But in 2003, she did an article titled Emancipation Day Celebrations, the Commemoration of Slavery and Freedom in Iowa. And so she did that in 2003. And then she wrote a historical monograph, book, Emancipation's Diaspora, Race and Reconstruction in the Upper Midwest. And that was released by Johns Hopkins Press in 2009. In her book, and I'll jump off my screen, my starting screen anyway, and get us set up on the talk. But she talks about these events, and this slide from the Iowa State Bystander, the Black Iowa newspaper starting to be published in 1894 and continued into the 21st century. References an Emancipation Day event, and today is a fitting day to have an Emancipation Day talk because September was one of those, 22nd was one of those dates of Emancipation Days. But before I get too much into that, let me just talk about Dr. Schwalm's scholarship a little bit more. She talks about Emancipation Day events as rituals of commemoration that look at prayers and speeches or orations and recitals is one of the features. So rituals of commemoration, then as events of civic and expressive culture that involve music, dancing, food, and drinking. Then another feature of Emancipation Day events are public performances of civic and expressive culture, which involve parades and processions. And then that they were also private elements of indoor gatherings like a Black church meeting. And as we'll see, Black churches play a big role in these events, but they truly are integrated events across the state that begin, as mentioned, before the Civil War and really continue into the mid-20th century. So this is a part of our state's history that is rich and deep and far-ranging, and yet as our state's population changed and people who had been enslaved at one time and living in Iowa had passed, or their children had passed, other than Dr. Schwalm's work, is largely been forgotten. And so it helped shape the collective memory of a couple of generations of Iowans. And yet today, most Iowans aren't familiar with this story, or many Iowans. I don't know about most, but many Iowans. So let's look at this event from September of 1901 that's on the screen. And it really does represent all those things that Dr. Schwalm highlights, but also just the general event itself. And so saying that the 22nd has come and gone, with it a grand emancipation celebration in Buxton. And if you don't know Buxton's history, and I think most of the audience does, but was a coal mining community in the Mahaska, Monroe County line area, and was around 5,000 to 7,000 people at any given time, was vibrant from 1900 to 1920. And then as the mines ran out of coal, and as coal became less in demand, the community ceased to exist. So there's really not much left of Buxton today, but this was a community of about 5,000 to 7,000 people, a plurality of them Black. And so a really unique story, and no shock then that Buxton would host an Emancipation Day event. And the reason why the 22nd was an Emancipation Day, and I'll reiterate this, that was the date that President Lincoln had issued in 1862 the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. So in this case, they celebrated on the 21st, and just gets at some of the blue laws and the depth of religion too in most Iowa communities, but certainly in the community of Buxton, saying that the 22nd was a Sunday, didn't want to have an event on a Sunday, so they did it on the 21st in 1901. And then at sunrise, a salute was fired, and from that time, things began to liven up. The celebration was on. Hundreds of people poured into the town from the country and the neighboring towns and thronged the streets waiting for the parade. At noon, the parade moved from the Oddfellows Hall and then lists out all the events, both the AME Church, and so I'm still in that first column, the AME being the African Methodist Episcopal Church, so what is today the Methodist Church, but the AME Church was the segregated version where communities didn't allow Blacks to worship with them, or that the Blacks wanted to have their own church. So you've got the AME Church, and also the Baptist Church involved through their Sunday schools. You've got Black soldiers from the 9th Cavalry involved. There were Blacks serving in the Iowa National Guard by this time. And then you've got speakers and citizens in carriages. Then in the afternoon, talking about the food. This is the top of the middle column. Early in the afternoon, people began to flock to Jackson Park, where a sheep, a hog, and the fatted calf, already nicely roasted, was quickly eaten. Then an afternoon program with a band concert. S. Joe Brown of Albia, he would later move to Des Moines, but was a lawyer, Black lawyer, and often shows up in these events, a very polished speaker. And so S. Joe Brown, important Iowa story there. If you don't know that, can't go into it today, but you should check out more about him. And so S. Joe Brown gives a speech, band plays again. Down in the middle column of that column, then saying, Mr. E.L. Smith read a paper on Abraham Lincoln. His paper was well prepared and instructive. Next, Miss Maggie Coleman, read a paper on Reverend Dickerson and the Emancipation, which was well prepared as well and well received. Then more music, then a baseball game and a shooting match consumed the rest of the day. Then a program that involved evening events and a dance that goes till midnight. So essentially from dawn till midnight on September 21st, 1901, the town of Buxton is honoring emancipation, freedom, and this was not a unique event in any way. It was a typical event, as you're going to see, and really wanted to pick the bystander and also want to give some credit to some folks who helped me out on this. Ricky King and Penny King gave me some advice, as did Dana James and Abena Imhotep. So I want to give thanks to them. And so here's the Iowa State Bystander, Iowa's Black newspaper, covering an event down in Buxton in 1901. But again, these events, as you're going to see, took place all across the state. And so for another example, we've got Albia, the county seat of Monroe County, in 1895, a big crowd, a glorious time, and plenty of fun. And so this one really is an integrated event that's being celebrated at the community. You've got it taking place at the fairgrounds. You've got events. The first paragraph really is delightful. Says, as decreed by the noble Lincoln when he signed the Emancipation Proclamation that colored men, slaves should be freed, so it was in Albia on last Monday, and colored people from all parts of the state were the guests of Albia colored people, and they were all turned loose. The fairground was the place where the exercises were held, but all day a crowd was in town and made life merry with their laugh, their jovial, pleasant way, their happiness, and all Albia smiled and had a good time with them. A notable feature of the day was the way the white people turned out and helped them celebrate. So there you see, emphasizing that these are integrated events in, county seat towns, but also in smaller towns across the state. And then you see the rest of the events that take place. You've got a welcome. This is the top of the second second column from the left, saying speaking from including Mayor Anderson. So the white mayor is welcoming everyone to the community. You've got programs. Usually the Emancipation Proclamation would be read, and oftentimes by one of the Black women in the audience. And so speeches, programming, remarks from local officials, sometimes political officials would be speaking at these. And so that last column on the far right then in the notes section says, not the least of disturbance occurred and not an arrest was made. The various committees appointed by the AME Church did their work well, and they are happy over the success of the meeting. There was the peanut roaster, the flying wheel for cigars, and a regular 4th of July talk at each place. The church cleared between $90 and $100 on the day. The gross receipts on the day was nearly $200. So a nice little profit made by the AME Church. And then the union is requested on behalf of the colored people of the city to express their thanks to the white citizens who assisted in making the day a success. And this is just, a part of Iowa history that so many of us have either overlooked or have forgotten. And so just love this account of an event in a county seat town in southern Iowa where Blacks and white Iowans come together and recognize emancipation. And so this is an August event. And so I'll move to the next slide and slide and talk about where these occurred, and then we'll move into a little bit more faster pace. So far, and in a footnote from Dr. Schwalm, she had documented over 25 towns that hosted. I'm now over 30 towns that have hosted Emancipation Day events. And on the left side of the screen with the map are what I consider kind of the Western Iowa towns, except Muscatine. I'll tell you why in a second. And then on the right side of the screen are what I am classifying as kind of Eastern Iowa towns that hosted events. So you see a wide range of towns: Albia, Bedford, the county seat of Taylor County, Boone, county seat of Boone County, Centerville, county seat of Appanoose County, Council Bluffs, along with Avoca, Pottawatomie County, but then small towns like Cleveland and Mystic involved in those events too. And Burlington, Buxton, Cedar Rapids, DeWitt, Dubuque, large towns, but then Mechanicsville, as I'll show you in a minute. So a really far ranging, and I don't have all my dots on the map, but you can see as far north as Sioux City and drawing that kind of US 20 line over to Dubuque, you see events happening in our state connected to these emancipation events. And so we'll talk about early programs. We'll talk about the timing, how the celebrations continue and evolve, how they reflect on people who lived in Iowa who had been enslaved, how the celebrations start to fade away in Iowan communities, in Iowa communities, and then Juneteenth being celebrated in our state. So want to talk first about those dates of that January, August, September. So most of us who think about US history say, oh, Emancipation Proclamation takes effect January 1, 1863. And that was when President Lincoln formally issued the Emancipation Proclamation. But in September of 1862, on the 22nd, he had issued a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. So many Iowa communities and communities across the nation celebrated either January 1st or September 22nd. But in that pre-Civil War era and continuing into the 20th century, August 1st, connected to the emancipation of enslaved people in the West Indies, was an event that Black Iowans celebrated. So the dates you see are usually January 1st, the first week of August, often August 1st, and then September 22nd. So those are the dates connected to emancipation celebrations in Iowa that we will be talking about. But they took place across the nation. So here's the earliest documented reference I have found from Muscatine, July 31st, 1856, letting the community know that there will be an event the following day, saying the colored citizens of Muscatine will hold a celebration tomorrow, 1st of August, in commemoration of the emancipation of the West Indies. The citizens of Muscatine who feel desirous of witnessing the celebration are invited as spectators. The ceremonies will take place in the Grove near J.J. Hoops. A dinner and several speeches will be given on the occasion. So here you go, inviting the entire community to take part in this event connected to Black emancipation and equality that is welcoming, as I said, the entire community, and connected to that, the British freeing enslaved Blacks in the West Indies. 1830s is when that takes place. I want to say 1834, but I apologize for not getting the exact year. But it's the 1830s. And so there was a prominent Black community in Muscatine before the Civil War. Alexander Clark, who I'll reference a little bit later, is one of the leaders. The Black men and women of Muscatine had been pushing for Black equality in Iowa, trying to get the vote for Black men as the Constitution of 1857 is being debated in our state. So this is an active community promoting equality that involves all the people of the community. So 1856 so far is the earliest documented emancipation celebration reference I have found. And just as some other examples, here's a Keokuk event and a Des Moines event referenced in the Keokuk paper from 1867. So at times, Des Moines is one of the towns where it has sometimes in the early days an August event, and then has September events, and then also has January events. So Des Moines is a little unique that way, but Keokuk Blacks are having an event in 1867, and then the Tipton and Cedar County, again, for those who know Iowa history, had a prominent Quaker community. And so often Quakers accepted equality, and that's where the religious background of Iowa whites certainly plays into where you see Black communities to a degree, especially in that Civil War or pre-Civil War era. So in communities where there are Quakers or Methodists or Congregationalist parish, I don't want to, churches, there's the word I want to use, you often see Black communities. So no shock or surprise then that Tipton in Cedar County has an Emancipation Day event in 1869. And again, a very detailed report here in the Tipton paper with saying the colored citizens on last Friday. So this is connected to January 1 in Tipton, hosting a dinner, having a bountiful table, and then celebrations involved a toast, and then in the afternoon, the head of the society adjourned the meeting until 7 o'clock, and then in the evening, there was a dance being held in the community hall, and the whites attended it as well. And so again, Cedar County hosting in Tipton an Emancipation Day event in 1869. And here's just a notice on the left saying that there'll be an emancipation celebration in Mechanicsville, which is a small town just to the northeast of Tipton in Cedar County, and that Alexander Clark of Muscatine is scheduled to deliver the address. That Thomas Jefferson, a barber in the town, will be the host and president of the event. And so and then that's an 1870 event in Mechanicsville. Then you've got 1873 in August, an event taking place again in Tipton, and on the far right column, about 5 sentences down, you see Alexander Clark as a speaker there. So he is the most prominent Black leader in the state in that pre-1880 period, pre-1890 period, Alexander Clark of Muscatine. And so he often is that key speaker. But in that Tipton account, again, a procession is led by the Cedar Rapids Band. So then there's a platform where the mayor gives a welcome, and then a remark by a minister, and then the program with Alexander Clark as the chief speaker. And so these were events, and especially that 1869 to early 1870s, where Black men have been, the word white has been struck from our Constitution. So Black men can vote, any man can vote. Also, Alexander Clark with his daughter Susan had filed a lawsuit against the Muscatine school. And so Iowa Supreme Court, with the ruling by Justice Cole in 1868, had barred segregated schools in our state, though they persisted into the 1870s, but largely gone by 1880. So a lot to celebrate besides emancipation was that idea of equality and equal access that for Blacks in Iowa was gaining prominence. So really important events for Black identity as well in this period. And just to show again the kind of range and role in civic society that these events played. And here's a January 1st Emancipation Day event in Oskaloosa, so county seat of Mahaska County, Quaker influenced community. So a degree of equality there that might not be, and Black population there that might not be found in other communities. And so list of events, a procession between 200 to 300 people. They marched the Friends Church, so the Quaker Church. They had banners that said, "In God We Trust." Lincoln began. This is in that first column, about 12 sentences down. So the following banners were displayed: "In God We Trust." Lincoln began. Johnson failed. Grant finished. God grant peace and prosperity to our nation. Perseverance, industry, and morality. Lay up your treasures in heaven, with a portrait of Abraham Lincoln upon the opposite side, draped in black crepe. So still in this parade, mourning the assassination and honoring President Lincoln's role as the great emancipator. And love that too, that Lincoln began, Johnson failed, Grant finished. The idea that President Johnson, as a Southerner, really failed to hold to the promise, but that then President Grant, taking over, being elected after that, finishes at least some of the work of equality started by President Lincoln through the Reconstruction period. And so a really good, reference to, you've got 200 to 300 people participating, and then a set of resolutions were passed that I'm in the middle, or the second from the left column, saying, resolved that growing interests of our people in Iowa demand the establishment of a paper which our literary and political activities may be represented. So the desire for a Black newspaper is being promoted in Iowa in 1871, and that a committee of each congressional district be appointed as a convention to promote that Black newspaper. And then the third resolution is that we refer with pride to the action of the last Republican state convention, not only for its wise selection of true and tried men for the several offices, but also for placing Alexander Clark, a representative man of our people, on the committee of resolutions, so that noted Blacks in the state like Alexander Clark are starting to play a role in the Republican Party. Really doesn't go much farther than that, truth be told. They lament the demise of Honorable William Smith, who had been a representative out of the to the U.S. Congress in the 2nd District. And then in the third column, we look with pride at our mention in the name of Henry O'Connor for the next governor. He did not get the Republican nomination, but that's who the Blacks in Oskaloosa were supporting, and that they endorsed the entire platform of the last Republican convention. At this time, the gubernatorial, the governor's elections in Iowa were in the odd year. So you've got a governor's election coming up. And so that's part of why Henry O'Connor is being mentioned in that 5th resolution. Also of note, and this will be the last one I read, is item number 8, that they endorse the action of the last legislature in regard to women's suffrage. So not just equality based on race, but equality based on sex is being promoted by the Oskaloosa, the Mahaska County Black community. So this is something that, you know, there'd been some debate, but at least in the community on how support from the Black community was on women's suffrage. The Black community out of Oskaloosa is saying we support women's suffrage. So those sets of resolutions, and then you've got Alexander Clark speaking there as well with a sumptuous free dinner that night. And so talking about the local community who would throw slurs, but yet some of them were there, and it uses some of those slurs in the account. And then a speech by Alexander Clark comparing the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and then an event that goes on through the night. And so you've got, again, a major celebration, and this was pretty typical of that post-Civil War, early post-Civil War period. Just a couple of other examples connected to August. You've got an Emancipation Day event in Burlington, newspaper covering it, but it's actually a Lee County, so not a Des Moines County event, but a Lee County event at the fairgrounds, where parties from Davenport, Muscatine, Cedar Rapids, and Burlington were in attendance. So Blacks from across the state would attend these. Also references the ballroom costume of one lady in particular attracting a great deal of attention. She was dressed in green silk and wore a white lace shawl over her shoulders, and her feet were covered with white kid slippers, and that those attendees left for home Tuesday morning being well pleased with their trip. But so that the women attending these events, the dancing events, were certainly dressing in you know, the latest fashion, or what was regarded as fashionable dress. So nice account there of a Lee County event in the Burlington paper from August, and then a 1876 August event talking about no formal event in Burlington, but many Blacks enjoyed themselves at a picnic during the day and went to Monmouth on the Illinois side to attend the celebration there. Full report will be found on another page, but that there was event at the hall on Main Street near Jefferson, and that the colored people enjoyed themselves numerously and with great hilarity and native dignity and grace. And so really these are taking place, and Blacks from all over the state are attending them, and sometimes going across the river in communities where there may be an event, both largely the Mississippi River in the Quad Cities area today too. A couple of other examples just to show the breadth of these. And again, an August event from 1873 in Dubuque, and then also 1894, still Dubuque. So these aren't just like one and the community is done. These take place all through these decades connected to Emancipation Day. And again, often August tends to be the largest, most numerous, I guess would be the way to say that, date where these are held. Part of that is, I think, the weather. As we talk about, those January events, it's a little tougher to get together in January. And then September has a little less prominence too because of that preliminary Emancipation Day. And just want to comment on the Dubuque piece too. Dubuque in 1873, it was the last town I know that was segregating its schools, and it still was attempting to segregate its schools at this time. And yet here's an event in the community where, and I'm jumping over to the remarks by Mr. N. Hartsock of Fort Dodge. It's the third column, who is third from the left, saying that he gave a lengthy and eloquent speech covering the history of his race, tracing them back to their high civilization in the East when Thebes and the Sphinx were built, and following them down through their days of bondage to the day they were again made free men, the anniversary of which they were celebrating. And so talking about giving historical perspective to the Black experience on a world setting, but also nationally and in Iowa. And then just going on throughout the day and wrapping up on the last paragraph, saying, take the occasion of yesterday, all in all, and the colored people of Dubuque have no occasion to hang their heads. Their deportment, dresses, and well-to-do and contented looks command the respect of everyone and forever closes the mouths of those who prate about Negro inferiority and incapacity to seek and take part of full-fledged citizenship. May they continue to win enviable fame. The printer had a little error there in that third to last sentence. So this is a way that Blacks are showing we have a long history and we can engage in community events and be part of the social body and the political body in communities and just be Americans. And so you're seeing the white press emphasize the aspects of what Black Iowans were trying to promote through their activities. Here's an early 20th century account then from a September event in Ottumwa. And so is the lead up announcing that there will be the celebration on the 22nd in 1901. But this is a unique one because it also emphasizes that there are living in Iowa still, in the early 20th century, men and women who had been enslaved at one time. And so it talks first about the importance of September 22nd, and that's what I'll highlight here in a second. It's in that first column. And then I'll give just a little excerpt of what one of the local residents who had once been enslaved said. So talking about the importance of Emancipation Days, it's no wonder then that the colored people of the United States look forward with joyous anticipation to September 22nd and observe it as a holiday. It is the birthday of their freedom. It is the anniversary of the day upon which their race emerged from darkness of oppression, almost like that of the slaves of the old world, and began their forward march, which had already brought many of them to high standing among the learned and moneyed people of the country, and promises many greater results and the final triumph of the whole race over the drawbacks which prevent its rapid progress now, but which are being rapidly done away with through the progressiveness of the more enlightened representatives of the colored people. So that this is a day that everyone should recognize. It's a holiday. And so the idea that whether you choose August or September or January, this is an important day. And so no wonder that it's being honored and celebrated. And again, the Courier is a white-owned newspaper with white writers, and the editor is choosing to highlight the Black community in 1901 and Emancipation Day. And so then Z. Taylor was a local Black man, and there's a little bit connected to him. Earlier, he had escaped from enslavement and come to Iowa, and then he talks about his experience. And so Mr. Taylor, in speaking of the punishments meted out to slaves, said, "I cannot become interested in Uncle Tom's Cabin because I have seen so many things that completely surpass its scene. I was fortunate enough to escape much hard treatment during my life as a slave, but I have seen human beings treated so scornfully that I would shrink from even describing it. I have seen men and women stripped to the skin and staked out to a stake to each limb, then flogged 100 or 150 lashes, and all sometimes for some trivial offense." And so these are stories in the memories of Iowans who had been enslaved at one time, or the children of these people who heard stories from their parents or grandparents in some cases saying, here's what life was like to be enslaved and what I have seen. And so to not be surprised by human inhumanity to others. And so Mr. Taylor saying, I don't need to read about it, I have seen it, and that it's printed in the Ottumwa newspaper in 1901. So reminding Iowans that these are people living in the communities. A couple other examples just to reference some September events. And these are Southwest Iowa events, one that showed up, or South Central, depending on how you think of Adams County and Corning, but showing, again, county seat town, but not a big town, that Corning is having Emancipation Day events in the 1880s into the early 20th century, though both of these are from the 19th century, late 19th century. But Corning has a band from St. Joseph, Missouri into town that Reverend Reynolds of Minneapolis. So you've got a speaker from out of town coming into Corning, and that there's a baseball game, and that they have a grand ball at the Opera House that night. So a community event. And in 1896, again, you've got George Howard, who was a local Black man, as the marshal, vocal music by the colored choir, exercises at the park, including a reading of the Emancipation Proclamation. And again, just to reemphasize that every time they would read the Emancipation Proclamation, that January 1st document. But again, that a grand ball is being held at the Opera House for the amusement of those who attended. So that you've got these events happening in towns across the state, and a September event, again, 2 September events. And here's another Iowa State bystander account of a September event in Bedford. So Taylor County, Southern Iowa, Southwest Iowa county seat, and that the Blacks of Taylor County celebrated the 35th anniversary of the issuing of the Proclamation of Emancipation. That the Ivyville Band of 13 pieces marched through the city. You've got prayer, then an opening chorus, by a quartet of ladies, opening prayer by Reverend J.E. Johnson, music, address, and a welcome by local Republican politician. And then you've got a little bit of political discord because he's maybe interested in going off the gold standard. And so they describe his speech as strong and pathetic, but that's pathetic not in weak, but in full of pathos. And so, kind of a somber speech eulogizing the colored race. And then Emancipation Proclamation read by Mrs. J.A. Ashford. And it really often was read by one of the women of the community on the Emancipation Proclamation, and then concludes with saying the AME and Baptist Church are involved, that there's dinner and supper, dinner being the noon meal, supper being the evening meal. And I'm dying to know, and I haven't found any accounts of what the Ferris wheel looked like that was there in Bedford. So some sort of, and I'm guessing it's not quite to the scale of the Chicago World's Fair Ferris wheel of 1893, but at least a description referencing a Ferris wheel at the event in Bedford. An example from Centerville too of Appanoose County having an event in September, and pretty typical event as well. But in this one, the oversight of the dance was done by Mrs. Betty Cook, so a local woman's leading these efforts. And so it was also to a degree an event that allowed participation by both sexes, not just as speakers, but in this case, in organizing the event in Centerville in 1896. Just to show again the breadth and reach of these events, and the southern part of the state too, bordering Missouri, having a somewhat larger Black populations in the mid-sized county seats. And so Leon, county seat of Decatur County, having Emancipation Day events in August in the early 20th century. And the account too, and I have one later, but talking about Gallatin colored band. The Gallatin Black Baseball Club came in from northern Missouri. Cleveland, which is a town in Lucas County, is there, or Marion? Yeah, Lucas County, excuse me, yeah. That there's a parade. You've got a speaker from in a carriage from Kansas City, and then 6 young ladies on white horses followed them. And so a way for young women to promote, joy by young people in the community. A paper on the progress of Negro read by Miss Bertha Pugh, and then the speeches. And this one criticizes Governor Boys, who was a Democrat. He had been a Republican, but he changed parties because he favored local option on alcohol. And so hoping that the people of Iowa will not elect a Democrat again in 1901 in this case. You've got conclusion two with an opera hall that has a performance by the Cleveland, Iowa band. Minstrel, so the local Black band, and then you've got a big crowd, unusually orderly, as if that would be not expected, as we've seen, but I think the bias of the white editors at the time is like, oh, if you've got a bunch of Black Iowans together, there might be a chance for unrest. So some of that in bias is shown, but saying the big crowd was unusually orderly, no arrests being made during the day. And then these events did persist in Leon into the early 1900s. I think the last date I found in Leon is around 1907, 1908. A couple other examples from August events, and like this one from Clarinda from 1890, so Page County in the southwest part of the state, talking about the events. 20 young them in the program area in the second column from the left, that things began a few minutes after 10 in the morning. Colored band with Thomas Gordon, 20 young ladies in gala costume and the national colors, speakers in carriage, Clarinda Silver Cornet Band, and then following carriages and wagons, they arrived at the county fairgrounds. Things were called to order. Miss Mary P. Jones reads the Emancipation Proclamation, then the speech, and a festival was given at the City Hall for the benefit of the Colored Church. I'm now in the last column on this account from the Clarinda paper. Should have said the evening, it persists into the year, continues into the evening with a ball given at the Opera House, and then a festival was given at the City Hall for the benefit of the Colored Church, and funds were raised and taken all together. The colored people never had an equally good or as successful a celebration, and the entire management deserve and are being heartily congratulated. And Clarinda is one of those communities that has Emancipation Day events that run from the late 19th century, late 1800s into the early 20th century, so into the 19 teens and perhaps a little later from some of the work I've done. Just so many of these clippings that are out there in the newspapers that still finding many of these. There's many more to be found, I should say. Love in the account from Oskaloosa in 1890 that Miss Minnie Robinson, this is about 12, 15, probably 20 sentences down. It says, in the afternoon, Miss Minnie Robinson of Lexington, Missouri, read an interesting address, back down, back out, and back in, and then followed by the Emancipation Proclamation by Miss Anna Dari of Oskaloosa. So just to reemphasize, this is an event that lets Black women and Black men, take a civic role and assert for Black equality and their role in Iowa society and hopefully politics, though, as we know, women don't get the vote in Iowa until 1920, but at least being able to make public speeches that, advocate their ideas and for their involvement in discourse in the community. Another a couple of examples from Clarinda, just to show the persistence there, as I referenced, of events. A little bit of disappointment again, connected to the speech, but what I really want to call out is, if you look and if the numbers are correct, in that first sentence, the Emancipation Celebration Tuesday the 4th was a great success in point of attendance, estimated at 8,000 people. 8,000 people, Blacks and whites, in Clarinda for an Emancipation Day event in 1896. So these weren't small little community gatherings. They were drawing people from across the state and across the state line in the case of Clarinda. So having people from Missouri come up to attend. And I like the 1901 account because of the description of the parade in the middle column from 1901, saying, in the forenoon, the parade took place. Dr. Jones was the front of the carrying his Big Six banner. They had often held the Emancipation Day event on August 6th in Clarinda. And so it was known as the Big Six in Clarinda. And so Dr. Jones has his Big Six banner, and by his side was James Lunier, Chief Marshal of the day, mounted on horseback. Following them was the Bedford Hornet Band on foot. Then in a decorated carriage rode the Goddess of Liberty, Miss Georgia Stewart, accompanied by Florence Black of College Springs, small town in Page County as well. And so, you've got young women not just giving speeches, but also, as we mentioned earlier, dressing in costume, and in this case, dressed as the Goddess of Liberty. So probably Columbia or a similar to Statue of Liberty at this point. So it really was, as we've said, community-wide. And at the bottom clipping from the same paper, Essex is a small town in Page County. And so people from Essex coming over to Clarinda for the event as well. But not all was rosy or sunny at these events. So here's an account from the Clarinda paper. There was a section in the paper on page 3 called Growls. And here's an instance where the editor is saying that the Blacks who organized the Clarinda event ignored the Clarinda military band and instead chose the Blanchard band. And this is the bottom of the first column. The Blanchard band is all right, but the point is well taken that as Clarinda people pay the expenses, the money ought to be kept at home. And that it saying that it's white people who are really funding this, and that the Blacks of the community should be a little more open toward using white performers. And so it concludes starting at the bottom of the middle paragraph. The first year that the colored people raised their celebration money from their own industry, that year they will have a right to feel that they have taken a long step forward and that they are indeed free and independent citizens under the law, a truly progressive race. So a white editor complaining that the Black community didn't show enough gratitude for the support that the white community was giving financially. And so there was some pushback, not to say that these were always, glorious days of freedom and equality. Just a couple of other events just to show the breadth in larger communities, and I want to move through and give us time for some questions. So a Des Moines event with a barbecue. Again, this is the lead up ad on or article on the 17th for the 22nd. January 1st event that's going to take place in Cedar Rapids in 1915. Another bystander, and this is one that is taking place in Des Moines. So the bystander covering the Des Moines event of 1907, again being a January 1st event. I want to just call out, also talking in the third column about the role Blacks are starting to play on a national level. So commending W.E.B. Du Bois in 1907, who still hadn't totally reached his apex. Booker T. Washington certainly had, and referencing Frederick Douglass as well. And so a tribute to Blacks and Black and white soldiers of the Civil War. And so a nice Des Moines account there from the 1907 Emancipation event. And just to show again that these do continue across the state and into the 20th century. So a good Sioux City account from 1913 in August, great photo of young Blacks at the 1935 Sioux City Emancipation Day event. And so these do continue, as I'm going to show you here, into the 1940s. And then in that post-World War II period do start to fade away. But an August dance at Riverview Park here in Des Moines, that it was going to be for a Negro Emancipation Day dance on August 5th, and then giving away free pop at the Grant School playground in Waterloo. And Waterloo had been having Emancipation Day events beginning in the teens, really, as that Black population continued to grow, working railroads and other work. And so Waterloo is one of the towns that you see emancipation events lasting a longer time than some communities. And then, as Jennifer referenced in the introduction, you start seeing Emancipation Day celebrations being held. Quad Cities, I say Emancipation Day, now Juneteenth. Quad Cities and Davenport host the first Juneteenth event I know of in Iowa in 1989. Des Moines follows the next year with the Iowa Juneteenth Committee in 1990, and we'll talk about Gary Lawson, but you've got a reference in 1998 there with the Sioux City event taking place. And again, Gary Lawson, who was chairman of the Iowa Juneteenth Committee, he's the one that leads the effort to really make it a statewide event, what we know today as Iowa Juneteenth, with Dwana Bradley leading that out of Des Moines, but really trying to promote statewide the recognition of Juneteenth. And as Iowans, we've talked now deeply about how this is part of our state's history. And so shouldn't think of it as something new. And even Juneteenth, with it being a state holiday since 2002 and having, a history back to 1990, 1989 in our state is a long and rich part of our state's history. And so just to wrap up, Muscatine's number one, but those towns, again, all across the state that had Emancipation Day events. And nice little reference to in 1886 that Boone, then the community outside Boonesboro, 5,000 people attending an Emancipation Day celebration in Boonesboro in Boone County. So these are major events in communities all across the state to recognize Black freedom and equality, and just a rich, rich story that deserves a deeper look. I'm glad to have at least shared some stories today, and would encourage anybody watching or participating today to say, hey, this is part of our state's history, and need to have a fuller understanding of it. Keep looking, and more to be found. So I'll stop talking, and thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Leo. We have time to answer some questions. And if you have a question, please submit it through the Q&A feature here on Zoom. Please note we may not have time to get to all the questions, but let's start with one about what you just showed, the list of communities in Iowa who hosted these events. Were these celebrations typically held in coal mining communities?
That's a great question. And so I'll just go back to that list quickly. Towns like Albia or Centerville, to a degree, Sheraton, Cleveland is definitely a coal mining town. Same with Mystic. Mystic is one of those towns down in that area. So south central to southeast Iowa or Ottumwa, they have the coal palace. So coal mining is an opportunity for Blacks to earn a decent wage and in some instances have a degree of equality in a community like Buxton, where these Emancipation Day events certainly take place in coal mining communities. But when you start talking about Sioux City or Cedar Rapids or even, Page County like Clarinda, those are not coal mining communities. But in the case of Clarinda being on the Missouri border, or Newton is, another good county seat example, not coal mining related. So it really was wherever you had a Black population, Blacks were advocating for the celebration of emancipation and equality, as we said, going back to 1856. So thank you.
Our next question, it was noticed the celebration in Clarinda was held after the wheat and before the corn harvest. So have you found any other connection between these celebrations and harvest time?
I haven't looked at that. No harvest events pretty well. Those August events do kind of make sense too, because usually you would have had if you were a hired labor, a small Black farmer, and you also wanted to attract local white farmers, you would want to do an event probably after mid-July and pre-October 1 or so, because that's a little bit of a window. You've got your oats and your wheat harvested and stacked in that 1880s to 19 teens period. Shock threshing, getting into the weeds, so I'm not going to go too deep, but threshing changed a little bit for grain, small grain, and corn picking doesn't take place. So yeah, having an event in August to mid-September certainly made sense from an agricultural standpoint, and might be a way to celebrate too, that we've got a little bit of free time on our hands, so let's enjoy that while we can.
Perfect. And to keep us within our time today, this will be our last question, but can you discuss a little about your research process regarding this topic?
Sure. So as I referenced, Dr. Schwalm really did her article in Annals of Iowa in 2003 is what, put this on my radar, and had done a little bit of looking at it in the 2006 period, but not deep. And with newspapers being digitized, makes it so much easier. And that's where, I think there's a chance to do some digging, though manuscripts connected to Blacks. But if anybody watching has any references in their family papers or diaries or something, that would be a chance to see, some reactions, and really need to do some more looking at how it might be portrayed in Black newspapers as well. I had a few references to the Iowa State Bystander, but there were other Black newspapers in the state. So to get a little different diversity and perspective there from other newspapers. So far I've largely relied on newspapers, but if anybody has any other references, either in letters or diaries or other sources, I know Grout Museum District in Waterloo has some great Waterloo posters. We've got a few references in our Robert Patton collection to emancipation events, but not a lot. And so, knowing that there's some material out there like that's the exciting part to me too, is just to keep working on this and learn more about the role of Emancipation Days in our state, but also to, take a more active participation in Juneteenth. That's what I would, maybe leave the audience with is Juneteenth is has roots that go deep in our state's history. And so every Iowan should be proud to celebrate Juneteenth.
Well, with that answer, we'll bring this webinar to a close. Thank you to everyone joining us today. And we'd like to extend one last thank you to our presenter, Leo. Thank you, Leo.
You're welcome, Matt.
We hope everyone will sign up for the Iowa History 101 webinars that take place on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays throughout the year. There are many great stories from Iowa's past to tell in the upcoming months. Now, for more information and to register for future webinars in this series, check out our website at iowaculture.gov. This webinar and past presentations are available on our website as well. And while you're there, you can look into some other of our fantastic programs we have, like our Goldie's Kids Club activities for young historians. We look forward to virtually seeing you here again on Thursday, October 13th. Thank you all again for joining us today and have a great afternoon. Thank you all.